Hello and welcome to the Reproductive Justice Research Network's YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Adine O'Shaughnessy and I am one of the co-conveners of the Reproductive Justice Research Network. The video we're sharing today is the event with Dr. Rachel Roth, Dr. Carolyn Sufrin, and activists from the Chilean activist group Red de Acción Carcelaria on reproductive justice and incarceration. We upload videos regularly, so please do make sure to subscribe to our channel. Also, for the most up-to-date news, please make sure to like and follow us on Twitter at Reproductive Justice Cam and Facebook. And the links to these are in the description below. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody, for coming today to our first session for Lent term, organized by the Reproductive Justice Network. My name is Julieta Chaparro. I am a lecturer in the Sociology Department. And today I'll be co-chairing this session with Dr. Sofia Ugarte, who is also a co-convener of the Reproductive Justice Network. So we are very happy for having these three wonderful speakers for this session today, where we will be looking at questions of incarceration and its relationship to reproductive justice. And all of them have done amazing work in different contexts and in different roles. So it would be an excellent opportunity to hear about their experiences and the work they do with populations who are currently incarcerated and how their reproductive rights and lives have been compromised because of incarceration and the conditions that unfold after that. So let me just give us a brief introduction to the network, and then I'll introduce the speakers for today. So the Reproductive Justice Network is an interdisciplinary and collaborative space to reflect on the connections between reproductive politics, social inequality, and social justice from a transnational perspective. And I think this piece is particularly true in this case. We have speakers from different localities, and I'll say some of that later on. And the purpose of this network is to bring together scholars and activists and practitioners from diverse range of disciplinary backgrounds and geopolitical contexts for a series of discussions and debates on reproductive justice in its broadest sense. And this is, you've seen that for those of you who have been following the work that we've done. This academic year, we've had different people talking about topics such as eugenics, abortion politics, and in this case, incarceration. So this is very exciting. So in this session, we are turning our attention, as I said, to incarceration and how to think about it from a reproductive justice perspective. In this case, we will be looking in particular at two different contexts, the US and Chile. So we are interested in exploring the work that is being done in these two sites and what are the issues that incarcerated people face both in the US and Chile. And the point then of this session is to create or foster a transnational dialogue to find out the points of convergence in between these two contexts, but also to understand the particularities of each of them. And also, I think it will be interesting to see how reproductive justice, as possibly a traveling theory, can help us understand how incarceration deepens reproductive injustices, that the way as we see it is better understood as a continuum of circumstances, both within and outside the prison, that constrain people's reproductive freedom and the impacts that they have on their families and the communities, more broadly speaking. So as I said, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers today. We have Dr. Carolyn Sufrin, Dr. Rachel Roth, and Jacinta Rodriguez. So I want to express our gratitude for accepting our invitation this afternoon. We are very thrilled to having all of you this afternoon with us. So I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker. Carolyn Sufrin is an OBGYN and medical anthropologist. She's an associate professor of gynecology and obstetrics at Johns Hopkins University and associate director for the Center for Medical Humanities and Social Medicine at the School of Public Health. She has worked extensively on reproductive health issues affecting incarcerated women, from providing clinical care in jail to research, policy, and advocacy. Her work is situated at the intersection of reproductive justice, healthcare, and mass incarceration, which she examines in her book, Jail Care: Finding the Safety Net for Women Behind Bars, which I loved when I first read it with my students in 2017, actually, when I taught my first class on reproductive politics. So it's really an honor to having you today, Carolyn, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be part of this conversation today, and I'm looking forward to learning from my co-presenters and from all of you as well. So I do have some slides to share so I don't forget some of the data from our studies that I want to share. I'm going to do the requisite Zoom. Can you see my slides? Yes, great. Okay. So I'm going to talk today about some of the research that my team has done on abortion, and hopefully I'll have time to discuss tubal sterilization research as well in incarcerated settings in the United States. And although I don't have time to go into the depth of the mass incarceration phenomenon in the US and its historical foundations in white supremacy and institutionalized racism, I will summarize it by saying that everything about the current formation and any formation of mass incarceration in the US violates the core tenets of reproductive justice. And just, for background, some demographic backgrounds on women in the United States who are incarcerated. The most recent statistics estimate that there are 153,000 incarcerated females in prisons and jails. That was in 2020, and that was a significant drop from the year before, likely due to COVID, and we anticipate seeing a rise once the 2021 numbers are out. The majority of those women are young women of reproductive age. The majority of them are mothers and primary caregivers to young children. We know that racial disparities, which result from systemic racism, are prevalent, and so all of these factors preclude people's right to parent and to parent with dignity and in safety. When it comes to abortion, the legal record as it currently stands is very clear that incarcerated people do retain their constitutional right to abortion. Yet we know, in part from foundational research done by Dr. Roth, whom we'll hear from later, that abortion access for people who are incarcerated is inconsistent, sometimes with overtly obstructive policies that functionally prohibit abortion. So this precludes the right not to have children. We also know that mass incarceration violates the reproductive justice tenet to the right to have children. And some instances of that are recent examples in the United States of coercive sterilization of incarcerated people in California, Tennessee, Georgia, at least. Those are just the ones we know about. But what we don't really know is how many abortions and how many tubal sterilizations occur among incarcerated people in the US. And until very recently, there was an utter data void about this. And the fact that we didn't even know how many incarcerated pregnant people there were, let alone how many gave birth, miscarriages, abortions. That dearth of data signals how undervalued and how devalued this population is. So my team conducted a study with 22 state prison systems, all federal prisons, and 6 county jails in the US, including the 5 largest jails, who voluntarily participated in the study. And they reported on a monthly basis for 1 year various pregnancy outcomes, as well as policies related to pregnancy care. And then for 6 months, we also collected supplementary data about postpartum tubal sterilization procedures. Now, we have a lot of data, and if you're interested, you can go to our website, which I have at the end of my slides, to see this full infographic and links to all of our publications. So we collected information about a variety of outcomes, but what I'm going to focus on today are the abortion numbers, and then hopefully, if there's time, postpartum tubal sterilization numbers. So what did we find? Well, here are just some characteristics and the policies around surrounding abortion in our 22 state prison systems and the 6 jails. We did not ask the Bureau of Prisons, well, we asked the Bureau of Prisons to complete the policy survey, but in order to ensure their participation, they agreed to just report the monthly numbers. Although we know from publicly available data that abortion is allowed for people in federal custody. However, it's subject to the Hyde Amendment restrictions in the United States, which prohibits federal funding for abortion, except under certain circumstances. So among our state prisons and our jails in our study, this is the distribution of sites that were in what's considered by the Guttmacher Institute's evaluation abortion hostile states and abortion supportive states. So actually, 13 of our 22 prisons were in abortion hostile states. So we're able to get good, data from a wide range of abortion related states. And 17 of the prisons were actually not close to an abortion provider, which is consistent with what we know, that many state prisons are in rural areas, and that has led to economic development of some of these rural areas. But now let's get into what were their abortion policies. And some of this is an update, or not so much an update, but corresponding to data that Rachel Roth collected in her seminal study now 17 years ago, maybe more than that, from 2004. I can't do the math in my head. Of our 22 state prisons, 19 did allow abortion under some circumstances. Only half of them, 58% of the abortion allowing ones, but 11 of our 22 prisons allowed abortion in both the first and second trimester. Of our jails, 2 of them, and those 2 were in the same state, both in Texas, those 2 large county jails in Texas did not permit abortion. This wasn't, I should have emphasized this in the methods, but this was in 2016. Okay, so this was before HB 8 in Texas, or I'm sorry, SB 8 functionally outlawed abortion in the state. And in most cases in our state prisons, the incarcerated individual has to pay for their own abortion. This was even true in states where Medicaid, which is the public insurance program, state insurance program, where Medicaid would cover abortion if a person wasn't incarcerated. And then 7 of the states didn't even, whatever their abortion policy was, it wasn't written down, which allows for a lot of discretion. So then what did we find in terms of the numbers of abortions? Well, of the 816 pregnancies that ended in state and federal prisons in 1 year, there were only 11 abortions, 11. So 1% of the pregnancies ended in abortion. That is significantly lower than the national abortion ratio of 18%. And some people might say, well, people in the US, they go to jail first and then they go to prison. So maybe they were too far along for an abortion by the time they got to prison, except that there were 46 miscarriages in the prisons, and miscarriages happen at the same gestational ages as abortions would. So it's not so much a gestational age. Now, our study was limited by the fact that we're not able to collect any individual level data. So we don't, and we don't know, maybe people didn't want abortions or didn't need them. Although based on what we know from prior research, we can assume that there were individuals who did want or need abortions. And then if you look at our jails, all 4 of the jails in our study that allowed abortion were in abortion supportive states. So New York State, California, Illinois, and Massachusetts. And there were, in those 4 jails, there were 33 abortions. So 3 times as many as in all the prisons that we studied. And that abortion ratio was 15%. And although more of them were in the first trimester, nearly half were still in the second trimester. So I'm happy, if people have questions about the details of that study, I'm happy to answer. Those data have been published and are available on our website. But now what I want to do is share some data from a study that we are just wrapping up. Well, we've wrapped up the study, but we haven't published it yet. So all of the data I'm sharing with you are unpublished, and I request that you do not cite or share any of these data. But what we did was, because there was this, well, not so surprising, but striking low number of abortions in our prisons, and especially in the prisons, we wanted to understand what was happening. We certainly had some hypotheses, but we didn't know. And we didn't know from the perspectives of the incarcerated individuals themselves. And so we conducted a qualitative study that was designed to capture the narratives of incarcerated pregnant people who had tried to obtain abortions but could not. Now, we couldn't bill it as such to either the participants or the prisons and jails that we were trying to recruit subjects from. So more broadly, the study was about pregnancy-related decision-making while incarcerated. And we planned to do the study, and this is what we did, in states with 2 different abortion environments, one abortion supportive environment and one abortion restrictive state. And we wanted to interview people in prison and in jail in each state. So overall, we conducted 38 interviews. They occurred between 2018 and 2020. And in the supportive state, which I'll call state S, We interviewed 17 people. In state R, we had 21. And you can see the breakdown between prison and jail. And it was at one prison in each state and one jail in each state. And this is just, you know, all of our sites, even in the restrictive state, did officially allow abortion in the first trimester. It is notable, though, that the supportive state, even though this is a state where abortion in that state is legal up to viability and has no technical numerical gestational limit, nonetheless, the prison and our jail site only allowed it in the first trimester. The average gestational age at arrival to jail, whether it was our prison population when they got to jail, all people were early-ish in their pregnancy, and although some of them were a little later in their second trimester, a little early in their second trimester, a significant number of them did arrive still in their first trimester. I'm going to jump right in to share some of the findings. We had a lot of rich data and ones that were not only related to abortion, but to pregnancy experiences and access to health care and pregnancy care. But these are the 4 key themes that emerged around abortion, which I'll provide some data around these. So the first, what we sought out to document was narratives of people who had explicitly tried to access abortion and were denied. And we actually only interviewed 3 people who had that experience. And here are some key quotes from 2 of those people. One person who was in jail in the supportive state and who was early in her first trimester when she was arrested said, it was like, we don't take people to get abortions. We don't do abortions anymore. We used to, but that's not something we do anymore. So that broke my heart, she said. He's sweet as pie, but he's like, nope, we don't do abortions. He wasn't mean or nasty about it. I guess he was confused when I asked him. And another person who was also in her first trimester when she was arrested and also at the same jail, she described not just this passive, oh yeah, I don't think we do that, but actually imposition of the healthcare provider's own abortion views on her, which was to the detriment of her being able to access care. And she said, none of the medical professionals here believe in abortion. So when I brought it up, I was instantly shot down. You can read a little more of that if you want. I'm just doing the highlights here. But the physicians, and 2 different physicians, told her all the different ways I was wrong and why I shouldn't get an abortion. And this was at the jail in the supportive state where the official policy allows abortion in the first trimester. Now, there were only 3 people who identified overt obstruction. What we found more commonly was that there was just this assumption among people that because they were incarcerated, they had no right to abortion. They said, well, we lose all of our rights here, so I just didn't think I had a right to abortion. And what amplified that was that nobody received options counseling. Nobody was asked if they wanted an abortion. There was just an assumption that they were going to continue their pregnancies. And no healthcare staff provided people with information about abortion. And so both that combination of the assumption they have no rights and the information void cultivated this internalized sense that they have no rights to abortion. You can see some quotes here. One person, and this was both in state S and in state R. One person said, I didn't really have a choice of anything, so they didn't really ask. Another person said, I was told if you wanted an abortion when you're here at DOC, you can't because you were state's property. So she internalized the sense that she was not even human and therefore she didn't have rights. Another woman said, we're not looked as people, we're looked at as inmates. So all of our decisions are taken from us, even with our pregnancies. And then another woman said, so if I did want an abortion, I don't think I would have gotten the chance to get one just for the fact I was incarcerated and basically you have no rights. Another theme that emerged is that the temporality of incarceration and the uncertainty in their processing constrained abortion access. And one woman who repeatedly asked for a pregnancy test and didn't get one. Her pregnancy wasn't diagnosed until she was 22 weeks, which was a 2-month delay from when she requested one. At that point, she was too far along for her own comfort to have an abortion and for this jail's policy. And she said, basically, I was made to have this baby. And then the last theme I want to highlight is that the conditions of being incarcerated made people wish that they had had an abortion. So even people who were initially excited about being pregnant and parenting and who had not considered abortion or who were personally opposed to it, because they were pregnant and incarcerated and subjected to abysmal healthcare conditions, the uncertainty of what was going to happen to their babies after they were born, and the trauma of having to give birth in custody and then be forcibly separated from their newborns, those conditions made many women reevaluate their pregnancy decisions. One person said, I would rather just not put this baby through this, and I would have an abortion. Another said this would all be so much easier if I had just aborted. It's an emotional toll going through being incarcerated. And another said, I don't necessarily want the baby now. Before I did, so I definitely changed my mind. Because you don't know what they're going to do with your baby after you have it. Are they going to let you hold your baby? So people are conscripted to give birth and not have abortions, and then to do so in traumatic conditions. Now, I think I'm running out of time. So what I'm going to do is just, I really just want to highlight some numerical data on tubal sterilization, because just as people are being denied the right not to have children, they are also being denied the right to have children. And we know in the United States, the recent instances of coercive sterilization. So in the PIP study, the Pregnancy in Prison Statistics study, we also wanted to find out how often is this happening? And in terms of policies, we did find that 11 of the 22 state prisons did allow permanent contraception, and 5 of the 6 jails also allowed it. And none of these prisons, 6 of these prisons that allowed permanent contraception did not have access to reversible contraception. So that was permanent, was the only that was allowed. So how many happened? Well, over the 6 months of reporting at the 10 prisons and 4 jails that allowed the procedure, there were 3 tubal sterilizations that happened at the prisons, 3 that happened at 2 prisons, and 4 that happened at 2 jails. So the fact that this is a non-zero number is significant because, and this is work that Dr. Roth has been very involved in, it's impossible under the constrained and coercive conditions of incarceration for true reproductive freedom and informed consent for a permanent procedure like sterilization to be in line with reproductive justice. So I am going to end there. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer questions when that time comes.
Thank you, Carolyn. Up next, we have Rachel Roth, who's PhD and a policy consultant, organizer, and affiliated scholar at the Center of Women's Health and Human Rights at Suffolk University in Boston. Her research, writing, and advocacy focus on advancing reproductive justice, which includes challenging the criminal, legal, and prison systems in the US. In addition to several policy campaigns in Massachusetts, Dr. Roth is currently working on a program of research and human rights reports with the Abortion Rights Campaign in Ireland, of which is a proud member. She has written extensively about reproductive justice and the politics of imprisonment, including procreation, sexual, and abortion rights. And her book entitled Making Women Pay the Hidden Costs of Fetal Rights analyzes the impact of these rights on women and gender equality in the US. Another example of her research is her co-authored article titled If They Hand You a Paper, You Sign It, called to end the sterilization of women in prison with Sarah Ainsworth, and her paper, Do Prisoners Have Abortion Rights? Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining our session today. It's an honor, and the space is yours.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. So I just wanted to say again, thank you for inviting me, and I'm really excited to learn about another country from our next speaker, Jacinta. And also, I just wanted to say that, that I think the presentation Carolyn just gave is amazing. It's so hard, to do that kind of research. I'm sure she could tell us more if she had more time, to actually find people to talk with you about these experiences. And so it really sheds a lot of light on ongoing problems. So anyway, thank you for your presentation. So I started out, in this field, that's the theme of our panel today. I started out by studying reproductive rights violations in prison. So really the kinds of, things that Carolyn has illuminated for us. And then even as I kept working on those particular things, I started to shift the way I thought about it so that I wasn't just looking at how prisons violate someone's reproductive rights, but also how, what is the impact of ever being incarcerated on a person's reproductive health and rights over the course of their lifetime. So for example, how medical neglect and coercive sterilization foreclose future fertility, or how people lose their parental rights if they don't have someone to take care of their children while they're incarcerated. And even a brief encounter with incarceration can be devastating. In one case that was reported in New York, a woman sent to jail died 2 days later from a ruptured ectopic pregnancy because the staff ignored her pain. So she died of internal bleeding. Carolyn actually helped a woman in a different part of New York avoid a similar fate because she happened to be visiting a prison with a kind of human rights monitor and met a woman in solitary confinement who told her symptoms, and maybe had Carolyn as a doctor not been there, they wouldn't have actually given her access to healthcare. So the research that we just heard about and evidence from lawsuits and other sources make clear that prisons are sites of reproductive injustice. And so in addition to that realm of things that happens inside prison, I've come to think about mass incarceration as a barrier to reproductive justice more broadly, not just for people who are locked up, but for all of us. So, and even though my focus has always been primarily on women and women's experiences, I know that if every woman were let out of prison tomorrow, we would still have a massive injustice in the US. We would still have about 2 million people behind bars, including transgender people who suffer extreme abuse in prison. And we're learning more all the time about the deep impact of incarceration. So a paper came out, I think in the last year, showing that people who have relatives in prison actually have a drop in life expectancy of 2 years. So there is a significant impact that really ripples out. So in the US, only about 10% of people in jails and prisons are identified as women or self-identify as women, but incarceration has a huge impact on women in addition to this. 1 in 4 women is estimated to have an incarcerated family member, and for Black women, the number is nearly 1 in 2. And I found those fairly astonishing figures. I don't think most people in the US think that, that maybe they think prison is something that happens to somebody else, but those are really big numbers. And when a loved one is incarcerated, women are usually the ones who are holding families together. So they're taking care of children, the children they already have, and maybe bringing in nieces, nephews, grandparents taking care of grandchildren, all of this extra caregiving, while also shouldering the financial responsibility for their newly expanded families. So where I live in Massachusetts, which is kind of, I guess, a small to mid-sized state in the US, we have an incarceration rate that's low compared to the rest of the country. But if Massachusetts were a country, it would look like we had a very high incarceration rate. And similar to other parts of the US, prisoners in Massachusetts are disproportionately low income and Black and brown because of structural racism in the criminal legal system. And people might or might not know. I know when I was living in Ireland, people knew who Senator Elizabeth Warren was. So I live in a state that has a reputation for being very progressive, but then the reality is something different. So what I would like to do with the rest of my time is tell you about 2 campaigns that I'm working on in Massachusetts. And you saw, I think, in Carolyn's presentation that the US has a lot of different systems, right? So we have a federal prison system, which is just about 10% of people. Every state has a prison system. In most states, counties, jails are run by sheriffs. So there's all of these different actors and agencies controlling things. And what that means, similar to something like abortion, is that like if you want to make change, you have to do it one state at a time, usually 50 times over. So the first campaign that I'm working on is called Keeping Families Connected. And we're a coalition working to make phone calls free for people in prison and jail and their loved ones. And if we are successful, we will be only the 2nd state in the country to do this. So one woman who testified in favor of the bill at the hearing said that when she got out of prison, she didn't really know her daughters. Phone calls were too expensive to speak very often. And so she didn't know things like what music they like to listen to or what kind of clothes they like to wear. All of these sort of daily things that made up the life of her teenage girls while she was gone. Another woman in our coalition is married to a man in prison and has a 10-year-old son with him. She gets 2 phone bills every month. So the first is just her regular cell phone bill, and that is always $87 a month. And then she gets another phone bill from a company that specializes in phone services for prisons. And that bill is about $400 a month. So much, much more expensive. And the cost is so high because the company charges inflated rates and lots of fees. And the company keeps most of the profits and then it kicks some back to the prison. And a national study found that 1 in 3 families went into debt to stay in touch with relatives in prison. So it's a widespread problem. And these high costs are not a function of what the phone service really costs, as you can see from the difference in her bills. This is a deliberate policy choice to treat families as a source of revenue. So again, in Massachusetts, families spend about 14 cents a minute, which adds up to about $14 million a year to talk with their loved ones in prison and jail. And in our state, the legislature already allocates more than $1 billion, billion with a B, each year to prisons and jails. So as one activist said, the cost of phone calls is really just a rounding error. And the same is true of basics like toilet paper and period products that we're going to hear about next. So the state could easily provide these things, but in the US, there's a lot of privatization and prisons and jails create markets for private companies to sell these things to people who can barely afford them. So I just wanted to mention that in our group, we had an internal debate over a long period about how, I guess, sort of like what our bottom line was or how we wanted to achieve our goal. So there is a big tension because a lot of us, especially if we've done research on, the state prison or maybe the county sheriff where we live, like we know that they already have really big budgets and that they're not accountable for how they spend them. So some of us really felt like not a penny more, we don't want their budgets to go up. On the other hand, and where we ultimately landed is that families really need relief. They really need help. So if the state winds up spending a little bit more on our prisons and jails for people to get free phone calls, that's something we can live with. But that is a debate that we had. So I thought I would just share that with you. So the other major campaign I'm working on right now is a bill to create a 5-year moratorium on building or expanding prisons and jails. And the catalyst for this is that 2.5 years ago, the State Department of Correction announced that it wanted to close the Maine women's prison. And the name of this prison is MCI Framingham, after the town where it's located. And the prison goes all the way back to the 1870s with a mix of new and old buildings. And the number of women held there has dropped a lot. There used to be about 600 women there, in the not too distant past, but now there's fewer than 150 women there for a variety of reasons. So the Department of Correction, when it made this announcement, also said that it planned to replace the old, antiquated and somewhat, definitely unhealthy prison with a new trauma-informed prison designed especially for women. So I'd like to unpack this idea a little bit of what does it mean to say a prison is trauma-informed? So there is a field of trauma-informed design, and some of those principles would definitely be better for any human being. So this is everything from having more windows to bring in more natural light, or prisons have a lot of metal and harsh clanging noises, so maybe replacing some metal doors with wooden doors. Like, all of these things I think would be beneficial to any human being, whatever their gender. However, in practice, we don't think there's any such thing as a trauma-informed prison because prisons are inherently traumatic and they inflict trauma on the people in them. So prisons control so much about people's lives. They control people's movement from one place to another. They control what clothing they wear. I realize that can be different in other countries, but that's the way it is here. They control people's contact with the outside world. And I thought those statements from Carolyn's study really illustrate exactly this phenomenon. In addition, thinking again about this women's prison, prisons separate women from their children and their loved ones, and they subject them to daily indignities like strip searches and loss of privacy. One jail in Massachusetts allowed male guards to videotape women being strip searched. And it took a federal lawsuit to get that stopped. So the overall atmosphere is really punitive, coercive, and sometimes humiliating. And this atmosphere affects healthcare providers and other civilian workers who come into the prison, as well as the people who live there. So while Framingham Prison is in bad shape, as I've acknowledged, a broad coalition of almost 140 groups wants the state to do something other than spend millions of dollars on a new prison. Formerly incarcerated activists who actually lived in that prison are asking what else we could do instead. How many women could be released through clemency or parole or because of COVID? What kind of housing and services could we buy in the community for the money that is now spent on prisons and the millions more that they would spend to build this kind of prison? The state has tools at its disposal to release people that it doesn't use. Even worse, the Department of Correction was told by the legislature to evaluate people for being released because of COVID, because of their vulnerability to COVID. And the Department of Correction just never did it. They flat out didn't do it. There's a lawsuit pending, but there's no accountability. So the massive expenditures on incarceration stand in the way of paying for things that people need, especially people most likely to come into contact with police and prisons. The organization Forward Together in California defines reproductive justice as all people having the social, political, and economic power and resources to make healthy decisions about their gender, bodies, sexuality, and families for themselves and their communities. And I think this really broad, encompassing definition from Forward Together is helpful in thinking about incarceration writ large and how we can approach both violations within prison and actions to shrink the carceral systems wherever we live. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much. Up next, we have Jacinta from Redacción Carcelaria. And Redacción Carcelaria is a non-profit activist organization based in Chile. And it is founded by young women during the pandemic. And their purpose is to support the livelihoods and well-being of women in prison, as well as to visibilize the damaging consequences of these kinds of institutionalization for them, their families, and their communities. The goal of the organization is to advance on a penal and prison system in Chile that guarantees human rights within a just and egalitarian society. And with the conviction of assuring minimums of dignity to incarcerated persons, they work with a gender perspective on the sexual and reproductive health, mental health, and maternity of this specific group. Their everyday work also consists of providing a platform through which women in prison can voice their perspective and opinions of their experiences and personal situations. And Jacinta Rodriguez is a sociologist, and she's head or director of research of this organization. And thank you so much for joining us today, Jacinta. The Zoom is all yours now.
Thank you so much, Sophia. It's really truly a privilege to be here and to voice the preoccupations and the concerns and grievances of incarcerated women in Chile whose voice is really practically unheard of. So truly it's an honor to be here. I have prepared a slideshow, so I will now share my screen. Excuse me. There we go. I will. Okay, perfect. Well, so really, in order to understand the reality of incarcerated women in Chile, it's also important to understand how the prison system works in our country, and also to understand who these women are and what makes this group unique. So in the first place, I'd like to talk about the Chilean prison system and the Chilean female prison population. So first of all, the prison system in Chile is administered by a militarized institution called Gendarmeria, which is structured in 3 subsystems: the closed, the open, and the post-penitentiary system. Today, we will focus in the closed subsystem, that is what we know incarceration. In Chile, there are approximately 46,000 people who are serving time in a prison facility. It's a very small number compared to the United States, of course. And of this number, 3,370 of them are women, which represent approximately 7% of the total prison population, which actually put Chile as the second country in South America with the largest proportion of female prisoners. And like you can see in this graph, the female population has exponentially increased over the past decades and actually has surpassed the growth experienced by men, which is really largely due to harsher punishments for drug-related laws. Crimes, which is all part of a drug law passed in 2005. It's important to mention that women, and coherent with international literature, engage in crimes that are not as violent and severe as men, such as small drug crimes and crimes against property, that can be really traced back to economic necessity due to their role as caretakers. And going back to this exponential increase in female population, this is very problematic, specifically because this increase occurs in an already very crowded and saturated prison system, which has been really time and again been accused of deficient infrastructure and inhumane living conditions, and also has a very limited reintegration offer and truly lacks the professional staff necessary to ensure proper reintegration. But most of all, what's most problematic of this increase in female population is that it occurs in a male-oriented system that really does not consider the needs and the particularities of women. So with this in mind, it's important to understand the unique characteristics of women and to know who the incarcerated women in Chile are, because truly their backstory is deeply intertwined with their criminal trajectory. And well, women involved with the justice system are a pretty or share pretty homogeneous social and demographic characteristics, as most women come from a background of multidimensional exclusion. So incarcerated women, even more so than men, and of course the general population, have social, educational, and health indicators that are well below the national average. And just to give a few examples, women, approximately 3/4 of incarcerated women have not finished high school, and 8% cannot read or write. Similarly, a recent study found that even though 69% of women who had a job before entering prison, in most cases, this job was informal, was a low-skilled job with very low wages. So really, incarcerated women really do come from a background of economic adversity and lack of economic opportunities, which becomes an even bigger problem because 90% of incarcerated women in Chile are mothers and have an average of actually 3 children. And in almost 70% of these cases, one or more of these children is underaged. And before being incarcerated, most women were actually the head of their household, and at least half of them were the principal sustainers of their kids. In a scenario where the father is usually absent. So of course, the condition of motherhood really does condition their experience in prison. And another important dimension has to do with health. It's relevant to consider that women who are incarcerated have often lived in chaotic home environments as children, witnessing violence and family disruption from a very early age. For this reason, 62% of women experience some sort of abuse before they turn 18. 48% of them have experienced verbal violence. 45% of them, unfortunately, have experienced physical or sexual violence. And really, this exposure to chaos and violence expands into adulthood, particularly in romantic relationships, since almost 70% of them claim to have been a victim of abuse, or physical or sexual abuse from a romantic partner. And well, this all, of course, is fertile ground for substance and also mental health problems, especially when it goes untreated due to a lack of access to a healthcare system. So, and really to emphasize, incarcerated women do have also worse overall health outcomes than their male counterparts and also than the general population. And well, these are only a few characteristics of women, of course. However, they do suggest that prison is really a reflection of social and gender inequality. And I'm trying to, there we go. And truly, now focusing on women's experience during incarceration, unfortunately, while in prison, none of the above really changes. Women are still subjected to social and gender discrimination and abuse. And this is because, again, the prison system in Chile ignores the needs and particularities of women, neglecting different variables such as gender abuse, drug dependency, mental health issues, motherhood, and menstrual hygiene and sexual and reproductive rights. So one of the first most important things that really reflect this gendered experience is the limited access to health services. Women who are incarcerated have a background of health issues, and And during their time in prison, they have a very limited and deficient access to health and treatment services. A study actually found that 32% of incarcerated women claimed that their time in prison actually worsened their mental and physical health. And also in most prison facilities, despite that, of course, there is professional health available, the medical staff is very limited, particularly when it comes to specialists such as gynecologists. And what does this mean? Of course, long waiting lists. It means inadequate attention, and of course, it's very a lack of continuous medical care when it comes to chronic health problems. And as a consequence, women rarely access routine or preventative exams and tend to receive medical attention as a reaction to a more severe and many times preventable problem. Well, and in particular, sexual and reproductive health is very limited. There's not much information about this. There's a huge gap of knowledge, but evidence shows that women offenders hardly ever access regular sexual checkups. And on several occasions, where we have actually had the opportunity to directly work with women, they tell us that not only they receive little to no gynecological attention, but they also claim that they are unfamiliar with STD prevention mechanisms, with self-check breast exams, among other things, this is very problematic because a background marked by sexual abuse and violence makes incarcerated women a very, very high risk group for sexual and reproductive health diseases, as well, of course, as unwanted pregnancies. In fact, around 2/3 of women who are mothers had at least one of their children before they turned 18. And again, it's also important to emphasize that most women come from deeply patriarchal communities. Chile is a very, very patriarchal country where sexual health is heavily stigmatized. And the combination of this and also the fact that many have poor educational backgrounds that do not ensure adequate sex education, and of course can lead to unsafe sexual practices. And just to mention, this deficient access to health does not end with sexual and reproductive health. It extends to mental health, to physical health, and to drug treatment. For example, 40% of women enter prison with a drug problem, but only 9% receive treatment during their time in prison. And well, another very important issue that women face and that the system does not consider and again neglects is period poverty. Period poverty refers to the lack of access to menstrual products and education. And well, first of all, it's important to say that female prison centers really lack adequate infrastructure. They have deficient access to water, to toilet facilities, and really all other essential infrastructure that's necessary to maintain a decent menstrual care and also to guarantee the privacy that women are entitled to. But really, unfortunately, inadequate infrastructure is not the biggest problem. The problem is that some women do not have access at all to menstrual supplies. Because in Chile, basic hygiene and menstrual products, even if this goes against international regulations, they are not facilitated nor secured by the government. So therefore, women depend on their families, on their friends, and the work of nonprofits and religious charities to have regular access to basic menstrual products, including sanitary pads, tampons, and even sometimes soap. So women who don't have strong support networks are often deprived of menstrual products, which is especially a problem in the north of the country where lots of women are immigrants and therefore don't have steady support systems in the country. So lots of women, and especially during the pandemic, where visitors were prohibited due to the threat of coronavirus, really are empty-handed. And in our experience, this is one of their primary concerns and grievances, that the fact that they do not have enough sanitary products every month, and that if they even have to resort to alternatives such as socks or other garments to manage their menstruation. And another important variable is motherhood. And again, it's not considered in the design of this male-oriented prison system. In the first place, regarding pregnancy and childbirth, there are currently 50 pregnant women in different facilities, which is a big number, considering that the total is 3,000 women. But there is evidence that there's not a clear protocol to follow once a woman starts child labor in penitentiary facilities. There have been several cases where women start presenting symptoms that indicate labor, but they are only taken to the penitentiary infirmary because there's insufficient medical staff and specialists. And many times the transfer to the hospital is also a problem because it's very slow and very bureaucratic. So there have been reported cases where women give birth in very inadequate, unsanitary conditions inside the prison itself. And moreover, and I have to say, definitely more shockingly, there have been cases where body constraints, such as shackles, are used on pregnant women during transfers to hospitals, gynecological examinations, and even during childbirth. The use of shackles during child labor, of course, may cause serious complications like hemorrhage or decreased fetal heart rate. And it's really completely inhumane and against international standards, but it's still part of the protocols of the institution that oversees the prison system. Motherhood is also quite problematic. Mothers who have children ages 0 to 2 actually can live with them during their time in prison. And there are facilities destined for pre and postnatal care, as well as the care of lactating infants. However, time and again, these facilities have been accused of being inadequate for the integral upbringing of a child. Just last week, we had the opportunity to go to a prison center in Santiago, and we started having a conversation about these facilities, and there really was a unanimous opinion that these spaces are simply hostile. And a woman emphasized that she said, it's all cement. Like, how can a child grow and learn on cement floor and between cement walls? So really, it's one of the principal grievances for mothers in prisons, and also going back to the lack of access to health. Women express their worry for the precarious medical conditions that are also available to their children. So, well, all of these problems that incarcerated women face reveal that the prison system is really disregards female needs and shows the importance to incorporate a gender perspective in prison policy. So really, that's when organizations such as ourselves step in and support incarcerated women however we can. I think Sophia really did a wonderful job explaining our purpose. It's basically to support incarcerated women in Chile and expose the detrimental consequences that prison has on them, their families, and their communities. Just to tell you guys a bit about how we started. The project was born during the first months of the COVID-19 pandemic because of the threat of the coronavirus, and the establishment of sanitary restrictions resulted in prisons shutting down, prohibiting visitors. And of course, like I mentioned before, leaving many women without access to basic necessities, given again that the government does not secure this for women. So the total shutdown really left thousands of women with very limited access to sanitary products, altering both their health and their well-being. So Acción, Carcelaria, whose direct translation is Network for Prison Action, it definitely sounds better in Spanish, was formed to help this situation through social media campaigns and with the help of private donations. And this is the first thing we started doing, and that focused on both sexual and reproductive health and motherhood, which became our lines of work, were the hygiene kit campaigns. These menstrual hygiene campaign kits really respond to our belief that everyone is entitled to minimum dignity. So we started distributing hygiene kits that contain sanitary pads, soap, shampoo, toilet paper, among other things. And by the end of 2021, and I'm also say very proudly, we've been able to organize around 10 fundraisers or campaigns that have helped 1,903 women in 21 different prison facilities. And well, as our organization grew, we wanted to expand our work beyond material assistance, if you will, and start really working directly with women and hopefully influencing public policy and the political agenda. So what we first started doing, these are the prison centers we have visited along Chile. It's an interesting graphic because Chile is a very long country. So anyway, and these are some pictures of how we make the kits, some of our volunteers, which are really everything to us. And the delivery of the kits in this case, this is the north of Chile in Iquique. So what we also started doing was we developed sexual health workshops where we really seek to promote the autonomy and the self-care of incarcerated women through a workshop cycle focused on sexual health, menstruation, and reproduction. The cycle consists of 5 workshops, including the reproductive female system, menstrual care, breast cancer awareness, sexual abuse, and protocols on how to report sexual abuse. So far, we've done this in 2 prison centers, and we've had great feedback on behalf of the women who have participated, which has been truly rewarding. At the same time, like I mentioned before, there's really very little information regarding the reality of women, especially when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and maternity. So we are interested in contributing somehow to the elimination of this gap of knowledge. And what we have done is started to collaborate with academic institutions and also with Gendarmeria, which is the institution that oversees the prison system, to gather information regarding incarcerated women, specifically about their sexual and reproductive health during imprisonment. And it's also worth mentioning that we are also working with an academic unit that's gathering information regarding the perception of women on the creation of the new constitution now, the democratic process that's going on in Chile. And finally, we're also interested in building dialogue and trying, of course, the key word is trying to influence public policy. We believe in the value of public policy as really a fundamental tool to tackle social issues. So with this in mind, we have created different spaces of dialogue that seek to inform and bring this information to everyone, and also influence actors in both the public and private arena to work towards securing the rights of the prison population. So we've done a series of seminars on incarcerated women, gender perspective, sexual health, voting rights. And also we have collaborated with other human rights organizations to lobby for legal and normative regulations that favor the rights of the prison population. So really, this is how we began addressing the challenges incarcerated people cope with, and we truly hope to keep on contributing and looking for solutions that improve the quality of life and secure the human rights of incarcerated women, and also bring and highlight the importance of incorporating a gender perspective. And really it's instances like this wonderful invitation that let us do so, by bringing these issues to light, by sharing and by really highlighting their urgency, and giving a voice to a social group that's really been silenced for a very long time. So just again, thank you so much for your invitations, and we welcome, any ideas or questions or comments you may have. Looking forward to discussing them with you. So thank you.
Thanks so much for this wonderful set of presentations. It was fantastic, and I think we're really privileged to having the opportunity of listening to the three speakers that we had today. And I think I just wanted to point out some of the highlights for me in these three presentations, and then maybe we'll go into the Q&A session. So first, before I move on with this, I forgot to say at the beginning that this session is being recorded. So please, if you don't want to appear in the video, you can reach out to us, and then we can edit the section before we post it on YouTube. So feel free to reach out to us, and we'll make sure that you don't appear on the video. So I just wanted to highlight something very important that Jacinta mentioned, and it ties really nicely with what Carolyn and Rachel said, is that the prison is a reflection of the social inequalities that exist outside of that space. And then imprisonment and the prison system reinforces those inequalities. And in particular, what we discussed today is reproductive injustices in various forms. We saw this in relationship to abortion, tubal ligation, access to menstrual health or childbirth or mothering. So it's a wide range of aspects of reproductive injustices that are reproduced by the prison system. And what I found interesting is this difference in Chile and the US, whereas in the US there is a move for the privatization of services in prison systems and even the managing of prison systems. What Jacinta is telling us is the role that charities and NGOs play in providing those services that the state cannot provide for the imprisoned population in Chile. So that's an interesting parallel there to figure, to find out how the privatization or the NGO is actually part of the result of a broader neoliberal move of defunding or providing less services, and in this case, in the prison system. And I wanted, and this is just a question that I have, and it goes back to something that Rachel mentioned in her presentation, is the question of the data accessibility and the data void that both Carolyn and Jacinta mentioned. And if you both would like to address this later in the Q&A session, it's like, first of all, I think, Carolyn, you did a wonderful job creating all this data to illustrate what are the conditions for abortion access in the prison. So first of all, I would like to know a little bit more on how you collected that data. Especially, I know there are people here in the audience who are also interested in doing research inside the prison. So it would be interesting for them to learn a little bit more of that experience. And what is the relevance of that data? Because data can do multiple things. The visibility of that data cannot go always as expected. So how do we ponder on the potential and the perils of that data as well. And Jacinta, you can perhaps also tell us a little bit on that. Sophie, I don't know if you have something to add or to say. Yeah, so we can start with this question and then we'll move on to some of the questions from the audience.
I'm happy to start, and thank you to my co-panelists for your wonderful comments as well. And so in terms of the inaccessibility of data, it is unfathomable and yet completely fathomable, knowing what we know about the opacity of prisons and jails in the United States, that we don't even know how many pregnant people there are behind bars. It speaks to the lack of transparency and oversight of our carceral system in general, but in particular, the complete elision of females and of pregnancy and reproduction. And so the study that I described, where we collected quantitative data for 1 year, before that, there wasn't any systematic information of the number of births that occurred. There was patchwork information, and there was a report from the Bureau of Justice Statistics published in 1999 that got replicated, and the statistics, it's not even clear where those statistics came from. And so our study was, as far as I know, the first and only study to systematically prospectively collect pregnancy outcomes data. However, that was not all 50 states and was certainly not all 3,000 plus jails in the United States. It was voluntary, and it was in 2016 to 2017. So we don't even have updated data. Now, the Federal Bureau of Prisons now, well, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is a branch of the Department of Justice in the US, is now required to collect data from federal prisons on pregnancy outcomes. But that's like only a sliver of the pregnant people who are in custody. So I think this void, this data void, I think of it as, people who don't count don't get counted. And when people don't get counted, they don't count. It perpetuates the problem, and people can say, oh, this is not an issue we have to deal with. And so it perpetuates the atrocious conditions and violations of rights. So we were able to collect some data. So how did we do that? And then what are some of the booms and pitfalls? So in terms of the PIP study, the statistics, it was the hardest part of that study was not actually, tabulating the numbers and analyzing the data. It was getting buy-in from the state prison systems and the federal prisons, as well as from all the sites to participate. And I think one thing that helped was my being located at a university. Sometimes that can be a hindrance, but they saw me as a neutral party, whether or not that's accurate. But that lent an air of at least political neutrality in their minds. Also, I have been working in this field for a long time, and so I had networks, and a lot of the connections and introductions were through other leaders in the field of carceral administration, so that helped too. But there were some facilities where it was just a cold call, and I framed it as, wouldn't you like to know this information? They weren't already collecting it, but I said, wouldn't you like to have a system in place to collect this information? So it took a lot of work, and for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, it actually took a letter from Congress that we sent to the director of the Bureau of Prisons. So not easy, very non-transparent data, but we were eventually able to collect some of it. But again, this is now outdated data. In terms of the qualitative research study, our two states were sites that were participants in the PIP study. And so we had built a relationship, and we framed it as, we want to understand people's experiences while pregnant. We certainly didn't tell them it was about abortion. So we framed it in a general sense, but because we had that pre-existing relationship, I think it also helped that I had previously worked as a doctor in a jail. I don't currently. I provide healthcare in a community-based setting, but I think the fact that I had been embedded in that setting also, helped me gain access as well. In terms of the data and how it's used, in a variety of ways. One one story I'd like to share is with about Cook County Jail in Chicago, which is one of the largest jails in the country. As they were collecting the data, they shared it with their sheriff, and they said, you know, this is a lot of pregnant people that we're admitting to our jails, many of them in their third trimester, and you know, many of them giving birth in custody. But overall, it's a small number of our population. Do we really need to have these women in custody? And the sheriff said, no, you know, unless there were certain charges, which, you know, even having exceptions is not necessarily, you know, they're still discretionary to some degree, but because of these data that they were collecting and that they could see, they were able to advocate for a change in their county. And now they really don't, you know, for most pregnant people who are arrested in their third trimester, they're released on their own recognizance. So that's a way that the data were used for other policy change. I haven't heard of any, you know, negative ways that it's been used, but I could imagine that maybe the tubal data, maybe some people see it as, oh, it's not enough. Maybe we should be doing more. I certainly hope that's not the case, but once they're in the, you know, the public domain, you know, people digest it as they will.
Yeah, that's a good point, Carolyn, because, or even they can say, well, it's not really a big problem. It's just a few people. What is the problem with that? That can really minimize the gravity of that. Even if it's just one person who is sterilized without their consent, that's a problem in itself. But, you know, the counting can go in different ways. And that's the case, for example, in my research in Peru, is like, initially the data was 200,000, and now the government gathered data and it was 8,000 women. So there is this, it was not as you know, as systematic as they initially said. So, you know, there is this move of trying to minimize really the gravity of what happened back in the 1990s in Peru. So, you know, the playing with numbers in many ways, and the political life of numbers in these cases. So we have a question by Fiona Bloomer. Fiona, would you like to ask your question? I can unmute you if you want. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Doesn't work?
Yeah.
Hi.
You. Yes. Sorry, I'm on my phone, so it's taken me a little while to find the right buttons to hit. Yeah, I was really, so first of all, to all the panelists, my area of specialty is abortion policy. And this area of reproductive justice broadly in prisons is new to me, and I'm working with some colleagues in criminology, and we're at the early stages of developing a project in the UK. So each of the issues that the speakers talked about I just find really, really fascinating, and I've learned a lot, which I love, you know. And it was really wonderful. And I just wanted to ask Jacinta, yes, about the response of the authorities to the intervention of the work of her organization. You know, were they welcoming or hostile to what was happening in terms of those interventions?
That's a very good question. I think that unfortunately in Chile, civil society does play an important role to supplement some of the issues that the state is not fully equipped to deal with or does not prioritize. So we have a very good relationship with Gendarmeria, which is this institution that oversees the prison system, and we really make an effort to take care of it, because in the end, everything that we are able to do, the work that we are able to do directly with women, even if it's simply bringing a hygiene kit with 4 sanitary pads and tampons and a bar of soap, that's everything goes through Gendarmeria. So we really have to have a good relationship. And there are also, it's important to recognize that there are great people in Gendarmeria with a very, very good, good disposition that want to change. However, of course, the fact that we are bringing to attention the inadequacy and the deficiencies of the system is, of course, problematic. So we always try to do it in the best way possible and recognize the efforts that Gendarmeria is also doing. So in that regard, I think we do have a good relationship with Gendarmeria. Sometimes, of course, we would like more support in our endeavors, such as the data compilation. We'd love to move forward with a project of gathering information. We already designed the research project on sexual health. But of course, it hasn't moved so smoothly, because really what we'll probably find is that women do not have access to menstrual products regularly, and that they don't have access to gynecological attention, etc. So of course, that's a very delicate subject. But still, I'd have to say that we do have support from them, and we have a good relationship that we really tend to keep. However, what is more complicated is, more than with the institution itself, is I think with Chilean society is a very punitive society that really rewards punishment and really sees a crime as one of the biggest preoccupations. So there's a lot of rejection to helping or aiding or sympathizing with incarcerated women, especially because they're not only people who have committed a felony, but they're also women. So, and well, we all know, I mean, women are more harshly judged than men in general. So if you've also committed a crime, the social judgment for not really fitting into the expectations of women, of a wife, of a mother, that I think that's what's been more difficult for us to move forward with our projects and to establish prisoner rights, and especially incarcerated women's rights as a priority in the political agenda, because it's an unpopular subject, and not with doesn't matter if the government is left or right. I think given this punitive characteristic of the Chilean society, it's really something that no government has made a priority. So hopefully our new government will take it into consideration, and I think we've already made some progress. For example, in September, there will be a very important democratic process where we are voting for a new constitution, and the government and several other institutions are working for the possibility of prisoners to vote. So that is progress, but it's definitely unpopular. And I think that's been our biggest challenge.
Yeah. Thanks, Jacinta. I see Catherine Bryan has a question, so I'll ask you to unmute yourself. You can ask. Did it work? Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, as I said, they're really, really fascinating presentations, but just fundamentally upsetting truths, I think, that you've uncovered and are sharing. So yeah, I'm not sure, Carolyn, if this is really covered by the research that you've done, and I wonder if maybe Rachel and Jacinta could also speak to this. But I was struck by when you were talking about the limited access to contraception and the sterilizations, and I couldn't help but wonder, from my limited knowledge of any federal prison system or prison systems around the world, about the reasons behind women wanting to be on contraception, other than obviously the other, you know, other health benefits potentially of being on contraception for different conditions, but why women would want to be on contraception while they're in prison, and any of the women who underwent the sterilization, although obviously you spoke about the issues regarding consent when you are incarcerated and how difficult that is, and then whether in fact you came across any women who became pregnant while in prison. Thank you.
Yes, I can speak to that. In other research that I've done, I've absolutely done studies on access to contraception and women's preferences and perspectives. And there's variability as with everything, but I can summarize some of the reasons that that people express wanting to be on contraception while in custody include that many of them are on it in the community, and so they appropriately see this as continuing medication. Just like if they had diabetes, they should be continued on insulin. And this is particularly, it's important for everybody, but it's especially important for people who are in jail. Jail stays in the US, the average length of stay is 25 days. And sometimes it can just be a few hours or a few days. And so if someone comes into jail, they're using oral contraceptive pills in the community, and then they're in jail and they're not allowed to use it, which is the case at many jails, then they return to their communities, and because of the jail, they could now potentially be pregnant and don't want to be. So that's one reason. They just, this is part of their healthcare and they want to continue any medications that they were on. For people who weren't on it pre-incarceration but want to start it in custody, the main reason that people give is that they want to use a method when they return to their communities, that they want to avoid pregnancy. Although some people absolutely do want to proactively be pregnant, and we should support that. And not coerce people to be on contraception just because they're in the criminal legal system. And then another reason is people fear being raped by guards and that want to protect themselves. And that is, although we don't know how commonly it happens, it's underreported, it absolutely happens. So I would say those are the three main contraceptive reasons that people want to be on it. In terms of tubal sterilization, that's not something that I've studied. I did advise a doctoral student who did her research on this, but she hasn't published the results yet, but I hope she does someday soon. And in terms of people who became pregnant while in custody, there was one person, there were three people who did, and the prison, and two of them, the prison said that they became pregnant while on a work release in the community. And the other one was someone who had a negative pregnancy test on arrival, and then a month later it was positive. And that from a medical perspective, that is plausible. None of them reported pregnancies that resulted, and we asked, none of them reported pregnancies that resulted from sexual assault in custody, although I have no doubt that it has happened.
Thanks, Carolyn. I think, Rachel, would you like to add something to that?
I can just add a bit, which is that it is all too common for people to be sexually assaulted in prison. And often what happens is women are punished for that. They might be sent to solitary confinement. In some instances, women are coerced by the person who either assaulted them or they thought they were having a consensual relationship with, kind of putting aside those thorny questions. They are sometimes coerced to have an abortion because the person, the person, whether it's an assailant or the guard, let's say, doesn't want it to be known that this happened because that could have negative consequences for them. So there are loads of lawsuits that have been brought around the country about sexual assault, and sometimes in there or other sources there is evidence that some of those assaults did lead to pregnancy.
I think we are running out of time, but Rachel, if you want to ask your question to Jacinta, maybe for those of you who can stay.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think you did wind up addressing it a little bit, but I was just really interested. I also wanted to say I thought it was so fascinating that the governments are different and the prison systems are different, but the characteristics of women in prison seem like they're pretty similar across our countries. I'm just really fascinated with the whole process of writing a new constitution and trying to guarantee rights, and what your involvement in that has been, if people have time to stay and listen.
Well, definitely, it is a very exciting a process, definitely a historical moment for Chile, and there's been quite debate regarding what can be written in a constitution, and if prisoner rights have to be laws, or actually can be part of the Constitution. I mean, you're probably very familiar with the U.S. Constitution, which is, I can't remember how many amendments, but I think it's like 20 something. In Chile, really, we used to have a very, still do, and trying to change a very longer, more specific constitution. So right now, the discussion is going regarding prisoner rights. Really has to do with what to include and to what point. And I think that the main goals are, first of all, to guarantee prisoner votes, because in Chile, actually, and this constitution, that constitution we have right now, that was made during dictatorship, actually, we have prisoners who have a sentence that is shorter than 3 years and 1 day are allowed to vote. And that's I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's a very significant percentage. However, right today, there are the mechanisms for prisoners to vote when they are incarcerated don't exist. So one of the main challenges is to secure the vote to write, and to the right to vote, and to actually participate in our democracy. So that's definitely something that we are working on, that's being worked on. And another has to do with the fact with sexual health and reproductive rights. And that has to do with, of course, access to menstrual products, which are part of international regulations, such as the Bangkok Law. So that is also trying to play a role in the new constitution, and also for the women to have access to contraception, and to overall health. Definitely, health is one of the big pillars that is trying to address this new constitution. So the access to integral health definitely includes prisoners, because as I mentioned in the presentation, really the health services are extremely limited, which only worsen the already deteriorated health that many incarcerated people have. So that's definitely also an important issue. And finally, of course, there's the subject of infrastructure. I don't know if you remember in the presentation, I didn't really stop and point it out, but there was a picture of one of the bathrooms in a prison in the north. To me, it's the most shocking picture we have. It's just so inhumane and so and just so shocking. So the guarantee to stop overcrowding and to stop saturation and to have decent and humane infrastructure is also definitely being discussed.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much once again to Carolyn, Rachel, and Jacinta for a fantastic event and talks. So please, for those of you, remember to register for our next event on May 11th on the Trans Pregnancy Project. And yeah, I will see some of you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for joining.